Good evening. This is Crash Talk, and I'm your host, Mike Harber. So we've got a kind of a continuation of an interview we did several weeks ago with a good friend of mine. But first, let's give our disclaimer. Neither Harber Appraisal, Mike Harber, or the guest on the show, or any members of Harber Appraisal are providing you legal advice. We're not attorneys. And if you need legal advice, then we suggest that you seek that of a practicing attorney in your local area. We do have a resource of attorneys if you need someone to discuss your claim. Just let us know. One more piece of information that we give, no charge if you just need help. So we had a discussion several weeks ago with Tony Lombardozzi, and that interview was very good. There was a lot of good information. Tony is a wealth of information. He's been around for a long time and has seen a lot of things in this industry and a lot of changes over the years. So with that, let me go back. Let's bring Tony back in and discuss his main concern for consumers in our current vehicle market that we're in right now, the complexity of vehicles. So with that, let's see what Tony has to say. You've seen a change in this industry over the last few years.
50 plus years.
So what is your biggest concern for consumers when they're in an automobile accident and they got to have their vehicle repaired? What's the biggest concern that you've seen in the change in the industry over these number of years?
Well, what I see for consumers, Mike, is this. The consumer has no understanding of the technical aspects of the vehicles that are produced today. How many computer systems control the vehicle? I mean, when you look at it, the average automobile today has 10 to 10 plus more times computer code than a 747 aircraft. That's a big change. And all these systems, the advanced driver assistant programs and so forth, are really very technical and are very safety related. And the consumer has no idea how these are affected in a collision. That's my biggest problem. If we want to educate the consumer, we have to educate the consumer prior to the accident, not when the accident happens.
Right.
So somehow or another, either it's our responsibility, which I don't believe we should be totally responsible to do this, but we should have some help from manufacturers and so forth that can get the word out to consumers. This vehicle is entirely different than vehicles that were produced even 3 years ago.
Right.
And the smallest collision could affect the safety and reliability of that vehicle. And consumers need to have the vehicle checked immediately after an accident.
Right. Well, that's interesting. You know, the whole thing with computers, and I didn't even know that would be the direction that you would want to go with your concern, but I understand the number of computers. And there was I don't know, it was an Audi or it was a Mercedes recently, and they had like 27 computers. I mean, it was mind-boggling. I mean,
they may have 27 main computers, but then they have subcomputers to back those up, which compile additional information. So in some instances, you may be as high as 60 individual small components of computerized components. And the reason I say that that's the consumer's issue is because not only does the consumer have to understand the complexity of the vehicle, but then it's going to be their responsibility to find a repair shop that is capable to repair and restore that vehicle back to somewhat pre-loss condition.
Well, you know, that brings up a good point too, and I think that's actually why I even gave you a call this morning. We had a customer reach out to us just recently because they had a repair done at one of the insurance company shops, And, you know, this is something that you and I have just beat our head against the wall for years, because I've always taken the position there's a conflict of interest. I mean, if you're a body shop and you've got a responsibility to repair a vehicle properly, how do you sign a contract with an insurance company to get more work? And in order to get more work, you've got to comply with their demand, and their demand is to keep costs down. And if you're keeping costs down at no matter how, that means you're cutting corners. You have to cut corners in order to do a proper repair. And even with the labor force out there today, the shops that are doing these type of repairs for the insurance companies, they can't possibly have fully qualified, trained technicians that understand the complexity of the vehicles, just like you brought up. And so, you know, they bring in these unqualified people in order to pay lower wages in order to be able to comply with what the insurance companies are demanding. So, you know, and like you said, educating the consumer so they understand the complexity and the importance of finding a good qualified shop. You know, you just get in the car, you press the button now. You don't even use keys anymore. and you drive. You don't want to even think about all that stuff. But I think there's, like you say, when you start thinking about an aircraft, and nobody would jeopardize doing a substandard or a cheap repair on an aircraft. But nowadays, these vehicles are just about as sophisticated, and safety is, again, it's got to be the top of the mind when you're doing a repair, or if you're the owner of the vehicle, to make sure that you are in good hands.
Well, just to give you a small example, Mike, and this may simplify things, the replacement of an outside rear view mirror on the driver's door. If it is not recalibrated after the installation, or if the door trim, the inside door trim is removed for any reason, or you disturb the mirror for any reason, everything has to be recalibrated, or your lane departure system may not work correctly. It may send a bad signal out to the computer saying that you're too close to someone when you're really not, and it begins to slow the vehicle down. These are so many things that have to be looked at now, even with minor issues. So, like the replacement of an outside rear view mirror. So the consumer doesn't understand this. And I'm not a firm believer that this is actually the way we should be going in automobiles, but we're getting toward the autonomous vehicle. Naturally, that's what it's leading to.
Yeah.
But there are so many systems in the vehicle that the average consumer doesn't understand. And to me, that's a big problem. Not only from the standpoint of going back to having the vehicle repaired, but just to having that consumer in that vehicle without the understanding of how these systems work.
Well, you know, and things are changing so fast. I mean, you just brought up the fully autonomous vehicle that drives themselves. I mean, we heard about that several years ago and thought, well, that's never going to, at least I thought, that's never really going to happen. And yet they're doing it.
Very close.
They're doing it. I actually, the vehicle, I've got a GMC SUV, and it's a 16. So it's not even new technology, but it has the lane departure. It has the backup cameras, and you can set your cruise control, and it will monitor the different distance between the vehicle ahead of me. I can exit off the freeway, and if I'm following another vehicle, I don't need to touch the brake, gas pedal, or anything. It'll just follow that vehicle with a safe distance, whatever I set it. And so we're getting more and more to where, I mean, I think for you and I mean, I've got, thinking of the 64 GTO and my 71 Chevelle and some of those vehicles. I mean, back in the day, we didn't even have seat belts. And I remember when they started talking about airbags, and it's just like, and everybody, I can remember when there was a big uproar about seat belts. I'm not going to wear a seat belt. I don't need to wear a seat belt, and how things have just made such a change. Now we're talking about vehicles driving themselves. And so, yeah, that's a point well taken. I think it is the consumer's responsibility, and I wonder where that education is really going to start coming from. If the manufacturers are going to start providing more information, I don't know.
Have you seen, if you ever go purchase a new vehicle today, just look at how thick the owner's manual is today. I mean, that's why most consumers just take that manual, stuff it in the glove compartment, and ignore it. Very few people will take it home and read it page for page. So that's a big issue. And another thing that's a big issue, Mike, is the replacement parts to replace some of these systems that might affect the advanced driver assist systems and so forth have to meet or exceed OEM standards. And parts are going to be a bigger issue today than they have been in the past.
Well, let's why don't we that's another topic I would really like to discuss.
Sure.
The whole imitation parts and what does that even mean? And again, for consumers' understanding. But for right now, why don't we just what we started talking about is these repairs. And this vehicle we looked at the other day that is just probably one of the worst looking repairs I've seen for a Mercedes. And I was asking you what your biggest concern was, over the years that you've seen. And so it's just the education, and it's people having an understanding, and knowing that they need to get into a shop that is working for them and not working for an insurance company. And what else would you say? I'd like to hold off on this whole imitation parts thing, and let's do another little segment on that. But what else would you have to say about the biggest concern?
Well, to begin to understand the industry as a consumer, you have to look at what happens. The repair shop has a contract with the vehicle owner to repair the car correctly. Now, we're going to assume that they are a shop that does repair vehicles correctly. The vehicle owner also has a contract with the insurance company to be reimbursed for any covered repairs. As long as those contracts remain separate, there's not a problem. But what has happened is that the industry has allowed the insurance company to come in and be involved in the repair contract that the shop has with the consumer, the vehicle owner. That interference, in some instances, could lead to improper repairs. These are things that consumers just don't understand. To me, if I was a consumer and I had begun to get educated, if I spoke with my insurance company and they said, boy, that's a good shop, but they charge a lot of money, that would be the first shop that I'd probably want to go to.
Yeah.
Anyone that says to me, we have many contracted shops and we'll guarantee their repairs, I would think twice. Why would an insurance company need to guarantee the repairs from a repairer who is supposedly qualified to repair the car properly?
Right.
So these are issues. And then the overall aspect is, does that third-party interference help to create an unsafe repair? And this happens. The industry lives in fear. The collision industry lives in fear. They live in fear of losing business. They live in fear of whether or not they're going to get along with insurance companies. So they feel pressured into doing things that even in their own mind they know is wrong. But they feel they're being pressured to do this so that they can continue in business. That leads to problems. There's no question about it. You've seen it. I've seen it in post-repair inspections. So somehow or another, that issue has to get resolved. And in my opinion, the only way it gets resolved is that the collision industry, the shops themselves, have to say no to insurance companies and tell the consumer, you have to deal with your insurance company to get reimbursed. We can repair the car properly, but we can't guarantee you'll be reimbursed by 100% by your insurer. And then let them take care of those issues.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. So many consumers don't want to have to be involved. They want to take their car in. I want my car fixed. You work with the insurance company. I don't want to have to pay anything but my deductible. And yet they just don't realize they need to be involved.
And what does that say? Do whatever you have to do so I don't pay anything out of my pocket. What does that lead to? Just what we were just discussing. Yeah. Corner cutting, save as much as you can, maybe create an unsafe repair. And in some instances, that does happen. In some instances, it creates a greater unsafe repair than the vehicle being just put on the road to be driven again. That vehicle should be taken off the road theoretically, but it's put back on the road. So that's what we're faced with today. And we cannot make the consumers' problems with their insurance companies our problems. We do that every day right now, and that's why we have such a low self-esteem of ourselves. Well, I honestly believe that's what happens.
Well, make sure everybody understands what you're talking about. When you say we, you're talking about
collision industry.
The collision industry, repair facilities, yes. And sometimes, maybe somebody listening that's never been in this situation before may not understand even who we you're referring to. Well, let's leave it at that. It's been a good conversation, and hopefully this is the type of thing that makes consumers think I need to get involved. So Tony, thanks an awful lot for your time, and you take care. Well, that was another great interview with Tony. I sure appreciate his wisdom and his just the knowledge that he holds. But I think it's important, after listening to Tony, getting it from another person over on the other side of our country, he's over on the East Coast, that this is your claim, it is your vehicle, and it's the safety of your family. Don't turn that over to somebody else. Get educated. There's a lot of sources out there. Unfortunately, there's no interest in the education until you're in the midst of this journey down the road of a collision and what to do. You're in a hurry. You want to get it done. You don't want to spend anything out of your own pocket. And yet, you really need to consider when you have some kind of an emergency and you need to go either to the ER or see a doctor, I don't think you stop and say, am I going to have to pay part of this? You need to get it taken care of because you're personally involved. The vehicles nowadays are the same. You really need to make sure that it's done right. And if you've got to pay a little bit out of your pocket and then deal with your insurance company on a later date, because you only have one deductible. And if there's something that they can exclude a payment for, well, then they need to prove that to you. But that's where we can come in. We can help you with that type of discovery. So anyway, it's been another good evening. Hopefully you've gained some insight. And if you've got questions or concerns, please you can send us a message, you can text, you can email. Always looking for information. If you have a particular topic that you'd like to see us discuss, you need some information, we're always here to answer questions for you if you just want to call. So with that, good evening, stay safe, keep your distance, wear your face mask. We'll see you next week. This has been Crash Talk.